So James Harden has had a rather interesting offseason in Houston. Well, he's actually been in Las Vegas more, but all the turmoil surrounding the Houston Rockets organization has led to Daryl Morey leaving and joining the Philadelphia 76ers organization. It's led to Russell Westbrook being traded to the Washington Wizards for John Wall. And now the last domino left to fall is James Harden, who reportedly wants out of Houston. This has led to an interesting debate amongst Blazer fans about whether or not the Portland Trail Blazers should make a move for James Harden. Now in this video, I will talk about all the reasons for and against that, and I will state my opinion on it. But first, we should look at how this trade would likely be structured. It would have to involve CJ McCollum in order to match salary, and then you likely would have to throw in Gary Trent Jr., and then two of the following three in Anthony Simons, Nasir Little, and Zach Collins. Beyond that, Portland already owes their 2021 first-round pick to the Houston Rockets, so they'd likely have to make that unprotected and then throw in a 2023 first-round pick and a 2025 first-round pick. It would likely take that sort of package in order to make it happen. Now, the people that want this trade to happen state that it would make Portland a true contender because they would have two of the top 8 players in the league. Now, I do understand this argument. The Lakers have 2 top 8 players in the league, and the Blazers could be the only other team in the NBA to have that level of star power. That's basically the only argument that one could make for this trade, is that the more superstars you have, the better your chances at winning a title. But this isn't NBA 2K. It's not quite that simple. There are many pitfalls of this potential deal. One is all the assets the Blazers would have to trade away. They'd be going all in with this move. And if they are going to go all in and make a risky move, I guess I can see the logic behind taking a risk like this, but Portland is in a really strong position going into the season because they finally have elite role players and legitimate depth. However, this trade would be giving up both those things. Of course, you replace CJ with Harden, but then you're giving up a Gary Trent Jr., you're giving up a Zach Collins. And while the depth is still solid, it's not as good as it is going into the season. So if you're going to give up depth, the upgrade in the starting lineup has to be big enough to justify that, and honestly, I feel like the upgrade is being overrated by a lot of Blazer fans that want this trade to happen. The Blazer fans that want this trade to happen are ignoring a bunch of little things that are important when it comes to roster construction. They're ignoring how Damon Harden would fit on the court. They're ignoring how much it raised the ceiling of our offense, because it's definitely not going to improve our defense. I know people say Harden has improved defensively. I disagree. I don't think he's any better on defense than CJ. Just because he gets steals doesn't make him a good defender. That is a casual argument. So if you make a move from CJ to James Harden, it's not improving the defense. And is our offense really going to be that much better? We were already the 3rd ranked offense last season with a patchwork lineup that involved Mario Hezonja, Anthony Tolliver, and Anthony Simons. I would say our offense is probably a little better this season, so we should definitely be a top 3 offense in the league. Now, if you add James Harden for CJ McCollum, yes, James Harden is a better offensive player, but is it really going to upgrade our offense that much that it justifies giving up the depth, giving up all those assets, and then some of the other problems that I'm going to state here? I don't think it does. Sure, we might be the best offense in the league, but we're already pretty much there with the roster as is. And here's the big issue for me on the offensive end. James Harden's style of play has shown that it doesn't translate that well to playoff basketball. We've seen James Harden struggle in the playoffs year after year after year. And sure, you could make the argument that having a Damian Lillard next to him could help him out, but in terms of Harden's style of play, it doesn't really matter who that second star is next to him, because the way Harden plays is just a heavy isolation style. Damian Lillard would likely be standing on the wing watching James Harden dribble the air out of the ball. Now, honestly, just a personal opinion, I can't stand that style of play, but I also just don't think it's that productive in the playoffs. In the playoffs, James Harden doesn't usually get the foul calls he gets during the regular season, where he's able to get more than 10 free throws a game by throwing his head back and flailing his arms. That doesn't work as well in the playoffs. Defenders are allowed to be a little bit more physical, and it's a little bit easier to guard James Harden's isolations when you're allowed a little bit more leeway in terms of how physical you are in defending it. Given the freedom that Terry Stotts affords his players, James Harden is not going to come to Portland and change his style of play. He's still going to be that isolation-heavy player, searching for fouls and dribbling the air out of the ball. And I just don't think that works that well in the playoffs. I also don't think it helps Dame when Dame gets trapped in the playoffs either. Having CJ on the court hasn't helped Dame beat the trap. And that's not because CJ has struggled. That's just because of a couple different things. A, the way we attack the trap, and B, when trapping, logically, CJ McCollum is the one guy that you also want to take away while trapping Dame. You want to let other guys beat you. In the past, that's been a Maurice Harkless. That's been a Al-Farouq Aminu. The upgrade from CJ to James Harden is not going to make a difference when Dame gets trapped. They're going to take away James Harden and still make other players beat them. So while some fans say it would be an enormous offensive upgrade to go from CJ McCollum to James Harden, I don't think it'd really help Dame much when Dame has the ball. And then in the playoffs, when things truly matter, I don't think it'd be as much of an upgrade as some fans are saying, because James Harden has regressed when playoff time comes around, and CJ McCollum has actually stepped up and played better. I honestly think their playoff performances are somewhat comparable. James Harden has still been a bit better during his playoff career, but not by enough to justify this sort of trade. And that's just talking about the on-court stuff. Honestly, for as much as I've talked down the on-court fit, because I think a lot of fans are overrating the upgrade from McCollum to Harden, I would be on the fence about making that deal from a basketball perspective. I can't stand watching James Harden's game, and I wouldn't really want that type of player on our team. For as much as people complain about CJ McCollum isolating, pounding the air out of the ball, James Harden's 10 times worse. I do not like the way that guy plays. But on the court, it definitely wouldn't hurt our championship chances, and it might help them a little bit. However, some fans are completely ignoring the locker room dynamic that would occur if you bring James Harden into this locker room. The Blazers have one of the strongest locker rooms in the league, and it's a real strength of theirs. They have a great leader in Damian Lillard. The mistake I see some fans making is saying, oh, well, Damian Lillard's a great leader, so James Harden would work here. The problem is James Harden isn't a role player. Role players are far more likely to be accepting of leadership from a number one guy in the locker room. The problem is James Harden sees himself as the number one guy. He had a guy in Chris Paul next to him who's also considered one of the better leaders in the NBA, and they ended up clashing, which ended up with Chris Paul being traded to the Oklahoma City Thunder for Russell Westbrook. That trade was a mistake in terms of on-the-court fit, even though Westbrook was thought of as the better player and the better talent. That talent upgrade wasn't cohesive on the floor, though, and at the time, that's what I was stating. And some people said I was crazy because I didn't think this made the Houston Rockets better. And guess what? It didn't. People far too often underrate the fit and cohesion factor of players on the court. Not to say CJ's super cohesive with Dame, but Harden's style of play next to Dame, I feel like would clash even more. But back to the locker room, James Harden clashed with a strong-willed leader in Chris Paul. What makes people think he won't clash with Damian Lillard? Because Damian Lillard is the leader in this locker room, and he's not the type that is going to put up with what James Harden has been doing in this past week, which is not showing up to training camp because he's partying in Vegas in the middle of a pandemic. That type of stuff wouldn't fly with Damian Lillard. The problem is, if Damian Lillard speaks up, James Harden is going to take issue with that, and they're going to clash. You cannot contend if you have your top two players, your two superstars, clashing in the locker room. It's just not possible. And frankly, I think this team is a dark horse contender. I think this team, if coached properly this season, if everything comes together correctly, can compete with anybody in a playoff series. And that's with a strong locker room. It's due in part to the fact that they have a good culture here in Portland. I don't want to give all that up for a guy that does the stuff that James Harden does. I don't want to do that. Now, if James Harden was more like an Anthony Davis type player and had these issues, then okay, maybe you could talk me into that a little bit more. But the problem is, I really don't think this would improve the team enough in order to justify all James Harden's antics, and I think that James Harden would clash with Dame. It just doesn't make much sense for me on the court, and it makes absolutely no sense for me off the court. So when you take into account a bunch of different factors that I feel like a lot of people are overlooking, I cannot be on board with the James Harden trade. Now, maybe that opinion would change if the team struggles all season, if CJ McCollum underperforms, and we're kind of desperate when the trade deadline comes around. Maybe I'd be more on board with it, but right now, I cannot justify any talk of a James Harden trade. So anyway, let me know what you think down in the comment section below. I know there's going to be some people saying that I'm a moron for not wanting a top 8 player in the league, but I'm taking into account a bunch of little things that I feel like a lot of fans are making the mistake of overlooking. Regardless if you agree or disagree, let me know what your thoughts are down in the comment section below. And with that, I'm out of here. Thank you guys for watching. I'll catch you all later. As always, peace out. Go Blazers.